Welcome to the Food Professor Podcast, presented by Cattle, Season 5, Episode 31, the Global Tariff War Edition. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm the Food Professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Our very special guest on this episode is Mark A.A. Warner. He's with MAAW Law, based in Toronto. He's an Ontario and New York attorney who has practiced trade, investment, and competition law in Toronto, New York, Washington, and Brussels as counsel to the OECD in Paris. He's a recognized expert on tariffs and trade, and it's great to bring his perspective to the show right for the time. Sylvain, we've talked about having him on for months, and I'm like, let's just wait until April 2nd. Let's just wait for the no date. Let's just wait for another date. It continues to evolve. Today we'll talk about that, but it's a great discussion.
It's a miracle that he actually had time for us. My goodness, he's so busy. But he's in the news a lot. He's commenting on this issue. Yep. I think he's brilliant, to be honest. I think he sees things a little bit differently. He brought some great thoughts to the table, I think, because right now there's a lot of hysteria, lots of emotions out there. Mark's approach is very, very legal, of course, but very rational as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion because he's very rational, as you say, and one has to ask, is it rational in the face of an irrational actor, or is there something else going on? We're going to get into that.
Exactly.
All right. Reminder to everybody, check out our newly refreshed YouTube channel. Lots of AI-generated videos that for some reason that I haven't been able to fix yet allow you to inspect Sylvain's pores on his face. It's extreme close up, but nevertheless, they're fun, and I'm trying to fix them. But anyway,
I take care of my air in my nostrils every single morning just to make sure.
You have to. I'm going to fix that, stupid AI thing. And of course, reminder that we're going to be together at Seattle and Toronto, April 29th to May 1st. Let's hope it's as popular as the Restaurants Canada show. I'm wearing a hat from one of the longtime vendors at that show. Yes. It's in the same venue in Toronto. I tried to get in yesterday. The Restaurant Canada PR folks are very well organized. The problem, I arrived midday, nowhere to park. Every place sold out. I drove for, how big that place is and how many spots there are.
Yeah,
every
lot park.
Every lot sold out. I drove around for 20 minutes, as many other people. It was like a conga line. And then I just gave up and went back home, so I didn't go to the RC show this year.
You didn't go? Oh, my God.
I just turned around and went home. There's literally nowhere to park.
Like you didn't want to park somewhere else and take a taxi or an Uber or something?
Well, there's anywhere near there. An hour from, I could do all those things and spend an hour and get there, but I only had a few minutes. Anyway.
That's too bad. It's a good show.
My advice for everyone, the Seattle show will be in the same venue. Go early. Early because the parking lot, or take an Uber or whatever, because the parking lot across the street at Ontario Place, lots of construction going on, so that limits the number of spots. Oh,
that's why. Okay,
that's one of the reasons. I think it was super cold here, like the coldest April 6th or whatever it was in Toronto history or some crazy thing like that. So a lot of people went underground because typically underground, which is premium, there's always room. Not this time. So anyway, unfortunately, I didn't get to walk the show this year, but. No fault of anyone's, but circumstance, I guess. All right. Let's get into the news because, as always, there's plenty of it. So let's talk about the latest breaking news. We're recording this on Wednesday. China's hit in the tit-for-tat escalation week with more tariffs just now, bringing their tariff rate to 125%. Right now, inbound goods into China from America, I think, have an 84% tariff. That's likely to rise, tit-for-tat. We'll see. A 90-day pause for any country that didn't have the temerity to hit back to the weird, massive tariff thing. Let's lay the groundwork from an ag perspective here. I hear American farmers worried about their soybean exports. That seems to come up a fair bit. What else from the U.S. is at jeopardy, and where can the Chinese go if they can to find substitutes? So what's the dollar amount? We know that there's a huge trade imbalance. Of course, China is the manufacturer of the world, so it's not balanced. But I know there's some ag that goes into China. What's at risk here?
Well, soybeans are the one commodity that everyone is watching because China needs a lot of it. But China actually has some options now with Brazil. It had a decent crop over the winter, their summer, I guess. And so I don't think it's going to be an issue. In fact, commodity prices are actually really, really low. This is why I think this trade war, because we're really looking at a true trade war between China and the U.S. That's the grand royale of trade wars. I do think that not a whole lot of investors are concerned about input costs and commodity prices because they're still quite low. Typically, whenever Russia issues an embargo, there's some issues with climate change somewhere around the world, a war in Ukraine, markets tend to go crazy and very nervous. Not this time. Actually, we're not seeing it at all. And so, I think it's surprising a lot of people. I think what's going on is that people are accepting the fact that China has a lot of options. And that's why people aren't getting overly upset about what's going on.
So it's so interesting, right? Because the Dow, even though it just spiked and rebounded after this 90-day pause announcement, has just been crushed for the past couple of days. But what you're telling us, what you're telling the listeners, is that the commodity markets for these ag products have been pretty stable through all this.
Yeah, pretty stable, which I think it has surprised a lot of people.
Yeah.
And because typically when people get nervous, when investors get nervous, they go towards gold. They go towards other sources, bonds and things like that, and commodities because people need to eat. And so, but not this time. It's not a place where you can actually make a whole lot of money because, well, for two reasons. One, I think there's less nervousness out there, but productivity is way high. I mean, we are producing a lot of food around the world. Over the winter, Australia did well, Brazil did well, Argentina, well, it's a mixed bag of different results, but overall, we're doing very well worldwide, and we're expecting a decent crop in the Northern Hemisphere as well.
I guess there'd be a few exceptions to that. Coffee and I guess it was olive oil. It sounds like olive oil is better, but coffee still seems to be under pressure, yeah? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's due to the fact that the Arabica beans requires a very specific climate. And both Vietnam and Brazil have been hit by not so great weather patterns. And that's putting a lot of pressure on coffee futures right now.
Now, in all of your response, I didn't hear Canada come up as an alternative supplier to China. Is there no opportunity for Canadian farmers with the higher price coming out of the States?
Well, since 2018, as you may very well know, our relationship with China has been a little strained. It's not buying as much pork anymore. It's not buying as much anything really anymore, except for canola, of course. It needs canola. It needs canola for sure. Canada right now, geopolitically, is not in a great place. It can't really say, well, we're going to take advantage of what's going on between the U.S. and China. It can't because we're so close to America right now. And America is, well, not a great friend to have right now. Let's be honest,
right.
And so that's the conundrum we're in. And in India, it's the same thing. Lots of potential in India, and we'll talk more with Mark about that. But again, we have some diplomatic issues with India as well.
I've lost track completely, even though I stay on top of this pretty closely, about where Canada is vis-a-vis tariffs in the U.S. Now, the last announcement prior to today was that we weren't on that big list. There was going to be no tariffs on CUSMA or USMCA eligible items. Where are we on our agriculture out to America in terms of the USMCA or the CUSMA? Are we in okay shape? Like, are we still in kind of trouble from an ag perspective?
We're still in trouble. In fact, because there's lots of tariffs affecting farmers right now, wheat farmers in particular. What we do know is that how countries have responded to the U.S., and there are two countries around the world, two countries who've actually have retaliated with a huge portfolio of products, and that would be China and Canada. That's basically it. Mexico has not retaliated yet, and we need to keep that in mind. And so that our response may very well attract more hits coming from America at this point, which is why I think we need to be extremely careful with how we deal with this issue of of tariffs and the Trump regime right now. But there are only two countries that have actually officially retaliated, and that would be Canada and China. Israel actually has decided to completely erase all tariffs, but they were still tariffed as well. So I'm not suggesting that the best route moving forward is to actually eliminate all tariffs, because it doesn't seem to be working. But we need to be careful here in how we respond, because right now around the world, even though we're trying to get closer to America, or we seem to be close to Americans, geopolitically, we actually are more aligned with China's policy right now, which is really intriguing.
Well, the world upside down. All right, Canadians who are traveling, make sure you got those flags on those backpacks when you're over in Europe this summer. That's all.
Oh, absolutely.
All I can say.
And make sure that you don't have too many pictures of Trump on your phone.
In general, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's move on from tariffs, because really it's such a, we'll get back to it, and the interview with Mark is fairly long and we go into it in great detail. So let's move off tariffs for a sec. An interesting study out of the Wall Street Journal that more Americans are bringing their lunches to work. And I saw another study. I saw that, and there was another one that appeared that more Americans are not taking, when they have a meal in the restaurant, a serious decline in the folks who are doing doggy bags, taking leftover product home. The two things kind of, I don't know why they kind of appeared in the news this week, but what do you make of this?
I didn't see any science behind the claims, but I thought it was an interesting claim nonetheless. Really, it's not a great economic indicator when you're seeing more people bringing lunches at work for two reasons. One, well, you bring your lunch to work typically to save money, okay? Two, and this is the psychology of lunches at work, is that you want to show to your boss that you're hardworking and you're not taking an hour out to go to a restaurant or somewhere else. You want to show that you're working hard, because perhaps you may feel precarious. You may feel that you may actually lose your job as a result of an economic downturn. And so that's the other psychology around lunches at work that probably is pushing a lot of people to say, you know what, I'm going to stick around. I'm going to be visible as I eat my lunch, probably at my desk, and show my boss that I'm very important. So the lunch politics are actually pretty important right now.
Lunch politics. All right. That's a great headline for this.
Because in the Wall Street Journal article, I didn't see any data at all. Like, I just saw a bunch of
anecdotes.
Lots of anecdotes. And probably the Wall Street Journal reporter just went to her fridge and said, oh, there's lots of lunches. Let's try to report on that. But it's not scientific. But I do feel that there is a strong correlation between the number of people bringing lunches at work versus economic cycles.
All right, lunch, politics, and productivity. There we go. There's our headline for the show. Let's talk about food safety. You're coming to Toronto, I believe, speaking at a food safety conference soon, yeah?
So I'm keynoting the National Food Safety Conference for the 7th time, I think, this year. Last time was 2 years ago. And it was all about AI. I mean, ChatGPT was basically a couple of months old. People didn't know how to deal with that. And this week, I'm just going to tackle the issue of DOGE, the issue of food safety while going through an economic downturn. What does it all mean? And do people feel more confident? The buy local movement. Grocers procuring food from all over the world with suppliers they may not know very well. Do we need to reassure the public in that regard? Are we exposing Canadians to more risks, less risks? So I'll be talking about all of these things at the conference. And frankly, that crowd I love, because you got a third are scholars, a third industry, and a third bureaucrats. It's the perfect world, and nobody's talking to each other.
It's a great place for them to mix. Now, you mentioned in our notes before the show that the University of Ottawa had a study saying that the food coming from the U.S. may not be as safe anymore. Is this connected to all these DOGE cuts that seem to be happening left, right, and center?
So this one prof out of U of O came out and said, listen, I think the food coming out of America is not as safe anymore. And frankly, I don't know where he got the data, why he's assuming this. I've actually spoken as soon as I saw the article. I actually, shout out, because you know that I have a relationship with the University of South Florida, the University of Texas A&M, and just reached out. Listen, is that something you're hearing in America? Zero, nothing. There are some stories in the media, but there's just no evidence that the number of food recalls are going up, that food safety is compromised, at least not yet.
Okay. By the way, at this event, make sure and say hi to a friend of mine, Sonny Brar. He'll be there. He's the vice president of global food safety for Fiera Foods. We were colleagues at Retail Council Canada. So if you see Sonny,
is he speaking? I think he's speaking. Isn't he?
He might be speaking. He would not be unusual for him. He's got great insights into all this, but you won't be able to miss him. He's got a big personality. So say hi to him for me. Let's take a break now. Let's hear from our amazing presenting sponsor, Cattle. Then we'll get to our interview with Mark Warner. Does your digital customer engagement strategy need a serious upgrade? Enter Cattle, Canada's consumer insights powerhouse with the largest, most active panel of everyday shoppers. They're not your typical sponsor. They're the voice of the consumer, always in the know on the hottest trends and shaping what's next. So why Cattle? They go beyond consumer insights. They're trailblazing the future of ratings and reviews and leading the charge in user-generated content with unmatched syndicated receipt data and the ability to gather reviews across any category. Cattle partners with giants like Walmart, Canadian Tire to deliver results that count. Visit askcattle.com now for an exclusive The Food Professor podcast listener discount on your first review or research campaign today. That's askcattle.com.
Well, I'm glad to welcome today a person that I've been following for many, many years. I can't believe we haven't had him on our show yet, but he's here. Mark Warner, a Canada-U.S. trade lawyer from MAAW Law firm in Toronto. He's well known. He always comments about global trades, and of course, he's been very busy talking about the new Trump administration and tariffs. Of course, Mark, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me.
So, tell us a little bit more about yourself, how you became Mark Warner, the person we know today, and what keeps you busy these days.
Sure. Well, I'm a Canadian and American trade lawyer, as you mentioned. I started out as an economist and had a summer job at an investment bank, and I made a 3-0 mistake, as I like to say. And so I ended up going to law school. I was always going to go to law school.
By default.
Right? Okay. Exactly. No. And I had a chance to work for a really good professor called Alan Rugman, who was a sort of international business scholar during the free trade negotiations. And then I went on. And so I basically practiced competition trade and foreign investment law. And I've worked in Canada and the U.S. and I worked at the OECD in Paris as well. And, in my practice, I've also represented, Canadian interests like softwood lumber interests, both, in the United States for Canada, for the government of Canada, and Ontario when I ran the legal branch there, representing the Ontario softwood lumber interests. And as a private lawyer in Toronto, also represented a dairy cooperative and a chicken cooperative.
Really?
various
Okay.
cases. So I've seen some of these issues from various different perspectives.
Do you enjoy dealing with cases related to food?
I have. I've done grocery work. They are interesting cases. I do find it's funny because as a lawyer, it's funny when particularly we're talking about things like supply management, because the public conversation around supply management doesn't really match the conversations I have with my clients. And yet the people who are the strongest advocates of supply management were in the boardrooms I've been in.
I know. It's messy. It's messy.
A disconnect between the two, to be honest.
Absolutely. I agree. The Liberation Day happened last week, okay? And I was really looking forward to hear you comment about what happened last week from a lawyer's perspective. I mean, what's your read of all this? So on April 2nd, President Trump issued reciprocal tariffs, quote unquote, on over 180 countries. And so from a legal perspective, what are some instruments that He's using, what are some instruments that you're seeing being used globally? Could you tell us more about what's going on and how that could or can impact global food trades in general?
Yeah, sure. I think from what I've seen, I don't think Trump is so far really bringing new trade issues to the agenda. He's using new instruments, new techniques. And so I sometimes worry in Canada that people are trying to make Trump the villain. And so like, okay, we didn't have a problem before, but I haven't detected any real new issues from him. But you're right, he is using new powers. So the core to understand this is that the American Constitution, Article 1 gives Congress the power to raise tariffs, but Article 2 gives the president the power over foreign affairs and basically emergency powers. And so for various reasons in the 20th century, basically after the last round, Smoot-Hawley tariffs, famous Smoot-Hawley tariffs and the Depression, Congress progressively delegated powers to the president in various tariff matters, and various presidents have used them to various degrees. Trump, in the first version of Trump, he pulled out the use of Section 232 for aluminum and steel tariffs, and that's basically national security. But there's still a process. He's got to study the industry, and most of those things are perfunctory. Let's be very honest about it. He says to his Secretary of Commerce, "Go study this, come back with a recommendation." And the Secretary comes back with a recommendation. But there's at least
you didn't make that up with Lupnick. There's actually a process.
It's been used before. It fell out of use. It was used before for agricultural products. I think some of those, if I'm not mistaken, going back to the Reagan time. So 232 has been used before. What Trump has done this time, he's using something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the famous IEEPA, we call it.
Right.
And so some people would say that IEEPA is new, but it has never been used before to raise tariffs. That's not 100% true, because there was a predecessor legislation that was used by Nixon to deal with a currency emergency. So it had the concept, it's been used in concept before, but it's technically correct to say that this particular statute's never been used before. And it doesn't have the process requirements that Section 232 will. It looks like the president could just say that he's found an emergency and trot off and declare an emergency and raise tariffs. Now, the courts will have to decide whether he has that power. The challenge is American courts don't like to second guess presidents on anything to do with national security and emergency. So, lots of lawyers will argue and will argue this back and forth. But the reality is, you're going to go up to the Supreme Court, who he's appointed three members of, and there are others who are conservative before. And you're going to ask them to do something that the Supreme Court almost never does, which is to second guess the American president on national security. So even though the rest of the world may laugh at national security and fentanyl and all this border migration and trade, whatever, it will take a pretty strong-willed court. And then the other part of it is, even if the court did rule against him, with Trump, you've got to ask is the famous question that was asked by Abraham Lincoln's secretary, I think Attorney General at some point, which is, how many legions does the Supreme Court have?
Right.
Who's going to enforce this edict from the court? So
it's funny because we're talking to a lawyer, but it feels like we're talking to a historian as well. Which is helpful.
There's a lot of history to this. I often say that one reason I'm trying to react calmly and not look at my portfolios, which I don't have many, is because I do have a sense of history with this. This will play out in time, in my view. But right now, everybody wants, including the Prime Minister, McCarthy, who frankly should know better. He wants to declare the end of history. So I don't know why. It seems for someone who's bragging about his experience in negotiation, it seems an odd thing to do, to declare the end of history and the world has to change. Anyway, I digress. But so that's what he's using. That's what Trump's using. And, the Congress could overturn any of this by basically taking back the delegated powers, although I will say that all of these emergency orders from President Trump always start with the line, "I'm using the powers vested in me under the Constitution," which is a reference to Article 2, which gives the president, the commander-in-chief, inherent power over national security. So he's basically saying, go and take it away. You want to take away the power you delegated to my predecessors? Go ahead. I still have Article 2.
I appreciate the sarcasm.
Yeah.
Michael, over to you.
So let's talk about, it's a great historical context, because let's talk about how these tariffs are different than what we've seen historically, even in his first term, even Biden, right? Biden put some pretty significant tariffs on China. So tariffs are not isolated to the Republicans or Democrats. They've been a tool for many, many, many years. I mean, what seems to be in this moment anyway, people taken by surprise, certainly the markets are taken by surprise, is the scope and scale, perhaps the somewhat arbitrary nature of how the calculations were done. How are these tariffs that we're experiencing today, and this is where Carney's coming from, I think, is like, this is kind of, as everyone says, I'm reordering the way we do trade. That's from Trump directly. How should Canadian food producers and exporters think about this as they set a global agenda for Canadian agriculture?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. I think that the key difference, they said, is that he's not using IAPA means he doesn't have to follow a process. He's basically using his straight out
executive
powers.
orders.
Use executive order, does
basically
whatever he wants, and he's setting very high levels. So now, having said that, if you look at some of the levels of tariffs that have been set in anti-dumping proceedings or countervailing duty cases, sometimes
garlic,
involving,
for example,
garlic or
Chinese garlic, for example,
blueberries from British Columbia or something, I think too is one, if I'm not mistaken. So these have been high, and they're also very arbitrary. The trading world, including Canada, doesn't like any of the calculations in anti-dumping, but at least there's a fig leaf of a process. People would say that again, to be a historian again, that the WTO rules on anti-dumping and countervailing duties are basically based on American law as they existed when the WTO was passed. So normally there is a process that they could say it's WTO consistent, even though it gives it ridiculously results. What's interesting, what is kind of interesting when I look at the map, of where these tariffs hit hardest, it's interesting because what you find going down the Western Hemisphere, North America and South America, he's actually been very lenient in applying in the actual tariffs that were applied. The baseline tariff of 10% is there. Canada and Mexico get out with the CUSMA USMCA. And so if you look at it, it's like white. And then you move over to China and Southeast Asia, and it gets dark blue. Mm-hmm. And how different is that than what Biden was doing? Because Biden had his friendshoring, right? He was going to say, I want things produced closer to me in the United States. The Western Hemisphere, the white part of Trump's state. See, when I look at it, this is what I sort of stand back and say, there's a real tendency to find that whoever's in power in the United States at any given point in time is the worst in history, right? When it comes to trade.
So we're talking about style here?
Yeah, because Trump 2.0 is worse than Biden. Biden was worse than Trump 1.0, in my view, with the friendshoring, nearshoring. Trump 1.0 was worse than Obama, who was worse than George W. Bush, who was worse than Bill Clinton. And you could probably take it back to George H.W. Bush was the last time you had someone who was really kind of, you might say, more free trade-ish. So, look, it is a significant use of executive authority. It's not to make light of it. And Canadian producers should be aware of that. I also think but also keep in mind that some of the trend line over time, as I said, shows that American presidents becoming more demanding of what they want from their trading partners. And that's part of the takeaway. And if you look at the through line, as I say, how when you look at the end of the day, you've got North America, which has some advantages, right? So we're not Vietnam, Cambodia, and China. We're basically
that's the what am I hearing? That's the fortress North American argument, right?
Exactly.
The trading zone is in North America. Now, if I'm a Canadian ag producer listening to this podcast, I may look at the current events and say, maybe there's some opportunities for me. Maybe China, maybe Europe, maybe whoever these large trading blocs are going to say, well, I think less positively about the U.S. We haven't seen retaliatory tariffs yet, but whatever frame that takes, do you think this moment in time or decade in time is an opportunity in some ways for Canadian agriculture?
It could be, but I mean, the challenge for Canada is going to be the quid pro quo for getting the lenient treatment closer to the United States and this hemisphere is that you're not behaving like Vietnam or Cambodia, which is what they actually put that basically into the agreement, the last version of the revised NAFTA that became CUSMA, right? They basically said if you want to add anybody else or enter a free trade agreement with any other country, we may revisit this CUSMA business. So, so to the extent that you go...
But aren't we already in, we've got CETA, we've got the
That's
Asian
fine, but
agreement.
China's not in them. See, I'm saying if you go and say, we're going to stick to the advantages we have with the CUSMA, and the basically means that we just have the bluster, but not the actual tariffs for the most part so far, at least with respect to the April 2nd version of the tariffs. But if you stay in response to that, if Carney gets up and gives a speech tomorrow and says, I'm going after the Chinese markets, and then Trump's going to say, really? Okay, I'll treat you like Vietnam then. So that's the risk. So there's an opportunity. There's probably a way to do all these things. But as I always say, what gets Canada in trouble very often in trade policy and trade law is Canadians sort of feel they need to do these things with neon signs. And if you put
what do you mean by that?
Well, to make a big deal out of, we're breaking away from you, big, bad, evil Donald Trump in the United States. We're going to do something with China. Right. Hey, world, look at me, look at me. And then that's a target which the Americans can't let go. So, and there are limits to how far you can hide what you're doing. But you certainly don't want to make a big pronouncement about, I think President Xi is better than Mr. Trump, so I'm going to go sell my wheat to President Xi. I'm going to go sell my beef and pork and whatever to him because I can't deal with you, Trump. He doesn't bug me.
But you could signal that. Let's say Canada, just to riff on this point, and then I'll pass the mic back to Sylvain. Let's say Canada says, those BYD 100% tariffs on EVs, maybe we're going to waive those because we did that in conjunction with the Biden administration, and that's got nothing to do with CUSMA. That's just being in lockstep with the Americans hoping not to have any tariffs. We could do that. That sends a pretty powerful signal to China, but it is outside the framework of CUSMA, right?
Yeah, but the problem with that, and I disagreed with those tariffs because I thought that if they were going to do the 100% tariffs on EVs or do tariffs on EVs, they should have done what the Europeans do, follow the process. So Canada always loves the rules-based international order jargon. So do what the Europeans do, pretend to do it under the WTO anti-dumping, countervailing duties, trade remedy things that we have. By using Section 53 of the customs tariff, which is what they did, it's basically our version of Section 301. It's our attempt to go unilaterally. We've now created the worst possible condition because Biden's no longer there to protect us on EVs. Trump doesn't like the EV stuff anyway. But if you tear away from it, then you're basically signaling that you're doing something very pro-China, and you don't have the fig leaf. So I don't know. I think it's going to be harder to take those off and sort of change your alignment on that. It just wasn't done properly the first time round, which is just how they do things. They wanted the press release and they got it, and now they're stuck with it.
Since October, yeah. Absolutely. Now, so I've heard your comments about how Canada has been handling tariffs and China and the U.S. I guess I want to get your thoughts on how Canada has responded, how Canada should be responding to the U.S., to China, and of course we have tariffs on lentils going to India, as you know, and so that's our food world that we cover on this podcast. So, from a food perspective, how do you think Canada has performed so far as a geopolitical player?
Yeah, well, I think it's been inconsistent, right? I think Prime Minister Trudeau went down to Washington to Mar-a-Lago first of all and showed that he was too weak, and that created a target for Trump. And then we turned around and became too tough, and then Trump doesn't like that either. I think we have to be
for the
moderate.
Goldilocks. The Goldilocks moment. There, we can trademark that term. Goldilocks trade moment.
If I'm reading a little bit into what Carney's done in his short time, he seems to not be acting as tough as Trudeau, but the rhetoric is slightly toned down, although he does have his foreign affairs minister, Madame Joly, who seems to say some very strident things, which surprised me because I don't think she was doing that before. So I'm not sure what's going on with that. No. But no, it's an interesting, it's a tough world because, like, if you go marching off the United States and say, we don't need you, we've got Europe, then you got a problem because France hasn't ratified and 9 other European member states haven't ratified CETA. A lot of them don't like our ag policy, and that's one of the reasons they're holding up the ratification of CETA. The UK has paused their negotiations of free trade with Canada over what? Over dairy.
Yep.
Of course. So if Mr. Carney's solution to get out of the U.S. trap is to go to the two countries in Europe who basically have stalled trade negotiations with us over ag. I don't know who's briefing the guy. I never know right now. Are people just saying?
So are we going to play truth or dare? Was that what you're saying?
I guess that's what it is. But it's fine to do the photo op and the steps of the Elysee.
I know.
But if you're going to leave the Elysee, at least get the commitment to the guy who's going to ratify CETA in this great new moment.
It feels like India is the answer to some of this.
Yes.
But our relations with India are politically complex, let's say.
Yeah, India could be a way out. I mean, trade agreements with India are difficult for every country because basically India's got a lot of people.
They're very protectionist, yeah.
They're very protectionist, but more than that, they always get they have a lot of people. And they want ways of moving lots of people out of India to, temporary or whatever. And so it's always an issue whether India sits down with China or sits down with the European Union or the UK or whoever it is. And that's why trade talks with India always kind of stall because other countries go gulp. There are lots of different angles that we can talk about. But so, I mean, sure, there are opportunities even in the, CPTPP areas, you might be able to, try to take more advantage of some of it. Some sales into some of those markets. But, as I said, the funny part is that the rest of the world that we're looking to help us out also has issues with us over some of the very same issues that Trump is raising, like dairy. Right. So that's gonna be a bit of a problem.
Listen, Mark, just today I spoke with one high-level Canadian food executive and one high-level American food executive, and they both kind of see their supply chain changing as a result of what's happening right now. And of course, CEOs are always very positive. They always try to look at opportunities. Is it fair to say that what's going on with Washington may actually open things up for both Mexico and Canada from a food perspective, from a food trade perspective? Is that something that you see on your radar?
I just try to imagine like which countries would it be with. That's what I, notionally, theoretically, I see the possibility, but I always try to isolate down. Well, where
Asian Pacific, Europe, coming from both sides, basically.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, it should be there. That's why we have those agreements. Keep in mind that let's just say we're competing with Australia for some products. Let's just say. Okay, so Australia's got hit with some tariffs. So what's Australia going to be doing? They're going to be competing with us in those new third markets as well. New Zealand potentially could do the same. So I just have a hard time. I mean, obviously the big enchilada obviously is China, but Brazil, they're stuck with the tariffs too. And some of those products we compete with Brazil on. And so I could see Brazil turning around and trying to get more into China. So it's just when I actually
Brazil is getting very close to China, very close. So undermining the U.S.
Exactly, that's part of the reason why they got sort of hit, and we'll see where they stay. So, I mean, notionally there should be supply chain opportunities in there, and it's just hard for me to think, given that everyone else is trying to save their bacon since it's a food show. It's really just hard for me to see where those opportunities for significant gains.
Well,
right?
Let's say I'll throw it back to Michael after this question. I mean, let's say you sit down with a food manufacturer in Canada, and you want to reassure the CEO, what would you say to that person?
Well, I think you have to investigate those markets. So I'd say let's do the work. Let's figure out what do you make, what are you selling, what are your prices like, who are you competing with. How can we get on the ground? How can we establish new relationships? And try to be realistic about it. Try to be. I think it's important to be realistic and pragmatic about it. Don't have rose-colored. Don't think you're going to replace the entire American market. With Europe, the other issue with Europe, and just to go back to there for a second, if that's where you're going, you do have issues of process as well, right? So, are we going to change our use of some chemicals and whatever, so we can get into the European market? Because there's probably a market there, but is there enough of a market that we'll say to the Americans, okay, enough of you, we're going to go over there with the Europeans and start producing along with their process? Because this is the part I think Canadians often miss. The Europeans are not changing their processes for Canada.
No,
not because they like us, not because they think we're cuddly. It ain't happening. So if you want to get into that market,
I lived in Europe for a while. It's a complicated place, you know.
Yeah,
it's complicated.
So I think there are opportunities, but I think you have to be sort of very granular about it, market by market, realistic about what kind of opportunities are there, keeping in mind supply costs. And I just have a guess that when it's all said and done, you know, although it's a moving ball here with Trump now, when it's all said and done, I think we might find that the next best market for us remains the United States. And that is deeply unsatisfying in the current nationalistic mode of elbows up. But I think when people actually start working it through and they start saying, okay, so he's threatened me tariffs that he's not applying. It's embarrassing. I don't like it. But I can manage a little bit. There's uncertainty. Right. We all have to deal with uncertainty.
Yeah, I think you know, Sylvain and I have talked about this frequently on the podcast, and thanks for this great discussion, by the way. Thanks so much. You know, the tariffs are one thing. The threat to our sovereignty, the 51st state talk, which has kind of calmed down in the past month, but that was very pick a word, enraging. I mean, some people didn't take him seriously. I think we should all take him seriously. Right. You know, there was that saying, you know, take him seriously, not literally. I think the market is now taking him pretty literally now too. But you know, I think that's the blend. It's funny you said earlier on the big enchilada was going to be. I thought you were going to say Mexico, because you know they're the food show. But you know, there's obviously opportunity in Mexico. Let me ask you this last question, an advice question to wrap up. Great conversation. You know, it's in the fullness of time. CUSMA, or the USMCA, as the Americans call it, will be up for negotiation. You know, what's your advice to the folks at the various tables negotiating that treaty? I mean, I think they might worry that the treaties aren't worth the paper they're written on. The WTO can't enforce anything, and we are one executive order. I mean, we've got all this signed by an agreement by Donald Trump himself that he, you know, uses the clever language and clever rules to evade, you know, this whole fentanyl red herring or red flag or whatever it is. If you're trying to negotiate a new agreement, what's your frame of mind going into it? You know, hey, whatever we negotiate doesn't really matter. It's on a day-to-day basis, or should this be a more, you know, should we take this as a serious undertaking that could, in the long run, you know, protect our interests?
Yeah, I do think that you have to. There's a danger of overreading the circumstance. I mean, he is still an American president that's elected for 4 years. And most credible views of the world and constitutional law, he will not get a third term, and someone else will come after him. Now, even keeping in mind what I said about the continuum of every successive president since George H.W. was becoming more protectionist than the one who preceded him, I think there is some reality that we might get back to some kind of regular order, at least, that we're at least following processes that we have recognized before. Although the problem that I think Biden did, just back into this, is he never got rid of the things that Trump did in his first term, which is kind of the problem the Democrats have put themselves in. And it's political. He didn't want to have the opposition. Yeah. So, but look, I very much believe that we've got to preserve the furniture for live to fight another day. We've got to keep as much of the architecture of our bilateral agreements in place, even if they're going to be administered imperfectly. Keeping in mind, I don't remember a day when Canadians were ever satisfied with American trade law. Like, I just don't. You know,
at least we had with NAFTA. I mean, my recollection of that big debate was that at least NAFTA is going to give us an adjudication process for disputes, whereas pre-NAFTA, there was not much of adjudication. It was like might wins.
Yeah, I did the numbers on this. You know, various points I remind people about this is. Because memories fade, and I'm too old now. But there were so many cases brought, anti-dumping and countervailing duties brought under NAFTA and the original FTA. People have just forgotten. Like, we've had a fraction of that under USMCA. It was just a proliferation of cases under NAFTA across the board. So
why is that, Mark? Is it because terms changed?
Yeah, the agreements didn't basically get rid of trade disputes, right? They never got rid of trade disputes. They basically provided a process to deal with them. I sometimes
an adjudication process.
Yeah, right. So I sometimes hear some of my fellow lawyers at the bar, sort of encourage the public to think that because we signed these agreements, the disputes were going to go away. You know, I dabble and have dabbled, as I said, in softwood lumber. I mean, that issue is not resolvable, in my view, other than by a negotiated process, because Americans will never accept that the the system of what do you call it again?
Crown land?
The stumpage, a stumpage and crown law. They'll never accept that as being consistent with a market economy. It just never will. And we're never going to get rid of it as far as I can tell. We've made one good effort. So I think you live to try to get back into some kind of process. At the WTO, it's hard to see. It seems to me that to the extent that the world thought that with the WTO they were getting a different kind of a system where the Americans would agree that, very tiny states could overrule them, that was never a realistic hope. But there's probably some way, once the rest of the world figures that out, and maybe this experience will teach us that and you also are too big a player to cut them out of the system. So side Ottawa consensus and that sort of thing where you say you can build something without them, that ain't going to work. So the bottom line is, let's keep the architecture. Let's keep going. And that means try to lower the passions, use diplomacy. Everybody's got to sort of reread Michael Pearson, Lester Pearson, and try to be more of that. And, and pour some of that...
there's some responsibility south of the border, right? The more you talk about we're going to crush your economy to take you over, let's be straightforward on that.
That's true. And a lot of that, I think a lot of that was personality with Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump. I think a lot of that was. It is interesting that he hasn't followed up a lot of that under Carney, and I just think he was getting a kick out of it. So it's not good. It's not good. We need to get out of this, though.
I need to ask one question about an issue, because since I've been talking to you, Mark, I've had some whiplash about supply management. What about supply management? So I get that question a lot. What's going to happen? What's your take on supply management overall? Is it about market access? Is it about the regime as a whole? What are your thoughts on what's likely to happen?
Well, I don't think Canada is going to move on it. And I just don't see politically how anyone will. And there's no party, sort of defending a classic free trade position as far as I can tell. And the votes just don't line up that way. But again, I think that all of our trading partners think it's an issue. So it's never going to go away. So if we want it to go away and people to stop bothering us, we're going to have to find something else to do.
It's not them, it's us.
Yeah. So, but that's I've been on the side of Canada negotiating and on the side of observing negotiations with Canada and being on the opposite side. So it is sort of what's frustrating a little bit when you negotiate with Canada, because they come to the table and say, I can't talk about that because that's provincial jurisdiction. I can't talk about that because it's culture. I can't talk about that because it's services. By the way, here's our long list of things we want from you. And, and this is why we can tell you why, if you do what we're asking you to do, it's actually in your interest to do it as opposed to what you want from us. And so it is a bit frustrating to negotiate with Canada. So I think at the end of the day, I think those days are over, to be honest with you, with all of our trading partners. You can see this by the stalemate with the British, sort of the stalemate with the Europeans and the Americans. And we're going to have to realize trade is not just the goods and services. It's actually sitting at the table and saying, I'll give you something if you give me that. And we're not used to that. We're used to basically saying all the good reasons why we don't have to do anything. And that I just don't think that's going to work going forward with Trump or with anybody anymore. I think we have to grow up a little bit.
Well, yeah, what a great conversation. Yep. Let's leave it there. Mark, thanks so much for joining Sylvain and I on the Food Professor podcast. I hope you might make some time in your agenda for us to get you back on. This is a fast-moving and vital issue both to the nation, consumers, and to our audience and to ag producers and the economy. So maybe in a couple of months we'll get you back on and get.
We didn't talk much about liquor and wine and liquor and stuff. So maybe another time we could talk about that, because I do think that interesting issues about Buy Ontario and Buy America. That's a good point. And that also comes into it as well. But we should. But this has been fun. Anyway, so let's do it again.
It's been great.
I can't believe I've been talking to a lawyer for half an hour and you haven't charged me a dime yet.
It's coming.
We haven't got the bill yet. That's a big assumption, Sylvain. That's a pretty big assumption you just made.
30-day payment terms, something like that.
Very generous. Very generous terms. All right, Mark, thanks again for joining us.
Okay, talk to you soon.
Thanks Mark.
Appreciate it. Welcome. Bye-bye.
All right. So you were recently in Quebec City. What brought you there?
I was invited.
Mm-hmm. For what? For what?
To a party with the Lieutenant Governor of the province of Quebec, the Honorable Jeannot. She decided to award me the Charles III Coronation Medal.
Ah, congratulations.
Yeah, little old me. I was quite surprised, to be honest, and I decided when I actually got the note from her office, I actually immediately decided to go with my wife, Janelle. Mm-hmm. She may be listening to this podcast. She listens to our podcast a lot, but I wanted her to be there because the medal, I think, belongs to her as much as it belongs to me. Because I mean, I couldn't do what I do without her support. So we have a family and we have things to do. We have investments. I mean, there's lots going on in our lives, and frankly, I couldn't be able to do what I do without her. So, anyways, it was a great event. So that we were a few people getting the medal. All of them are well known in Quebec, but they wouldn't be known outside of Quebec. So the person in charge of the COVID management, COVID crisis in Quebec, Dr. Arruda, he was awarded the medal. Do you know the store Simon's?
Yes, of course.
Peter Simon was there.
I've interviewed Peter. On the Voice of Retail. Yeah, and the current president, Bernard LeBlanc. Great merchant. Great merchant.
Well, Peter and I got the medal in Quebec City. So actually, I've never met him. Actually, he's very tall.
He's very tall.
Oh my God.
He's a big fella. Yeah, he's a big
I had no idea. Anyways, very nice, and I thank him for opening a store in Halifax.
What a story, right? As you know, on a side note, as we watch Hudson's Bay self-immolate, Simon's is both taking space that Nordstrom left, and they may be on the move. So it took them a while to get out.
Grand Chief Moza actually was there getting the medal. He was the one that negotiated the deal for James Bay with Robert Bourassa in the 1970s.
Here's a name from the past, Robert Bourassa.
Yeah, but he's a legend. So I was actually quite humble to be surrounded by these people.
Congratulations. Well done. Well, you got to bring that to Seattle, and we got to put it up on the board in the podcast studio, just so everybody knows. You get to wear it or whatever.
Anyways, I gave it to my wife because I think she should have it, and she'll bring it back to Halifax while I'm going to Toronto right now. I'm at the airport, so there you go.
All right. So in the world of a billion here and a billion there, sooner or later it's going to add up. Did you see that Kroger released in their financial statements, they spent $1 billion on their failed merger with Albertsons? $1 billion.
I did not know that. I didn't see that.
I don't think anybody knew that. I mean, these are big mergers, so you would expect there to be hundreds of millions of dollars, but it's $1 billion
my God.
in a failed merger. Now, in a completely...
Here's a question for you. Do you think they're going to go back at it?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason not to in some ways if the rationale still holds, but not from the. I mean, the leader's gone, right? He got let go because of some conflict thing he got into. So
some conflict
he got into. So
do you think it has something to do with what happened with the books, or do you think it's I think unreasonable behavior?
I don't, I think it's just the scale and scope. I don't think the two are connected really at all. One was just a personal thing, and the other was, I don't think there's any shenanigans going on.
I thought they could have been connected. I
don't know. I don't know for sure. All I know is who's the winner when companies go like Hudson's Bay go bankrupt or when companies merger. It's the consultants and the lawyers, man. They make out.
Oh yeah,
they make out like they spent $400 million on consultants. So
yikes. $400 million on consultants to actually try to buy Albertsons? Oh my God! Did you get anything? Were you in on it?
I got none of it. I would take 1% of that. I would take 1%. So now I want to get to our segment where we lift up and provide some profile for a local great Canadian food maker. I want to talk about Nerpies. Now, Michael Burgess has been on the podcast before. He's the founder of Nerpies in 2008 in Richmond Hill, north of Toronto. And I had I was thinking about him because I had some of his jerk sauce that I had some chicken with. I let it sit for a couple of hours. is the best I've ever had. Like, it is
Really?
fantastic. It's got no fillers. It's got no oils. It's all fantastic product. He's got a nice suite of flavorful hot sauces and marinades. Tasty, hot, not too hot, but the Jamaican.
Right.
And they're really, really good. So he's pretty widely available. But check him out on Nerpies, Nerpys.
Nerpys. Yep.
Nerpys. We've done an interview with Michael. He's
we had him
founder.
on when? Like 2 years ago?
Yeah, we had him on a while ago. And he's been in the game since 2008, right? So he's been chugging away. And anyway, if you enjoy flavors of Jamaica, you'll enjoy Nerpys. So that's our
excellent
our segment. Lastly, we have an announcement to make, right? We have a radio show.
Yes. Can you imagine? Would you have ever imagined, Michael, you would be a co-host of a syndicated national radio show?
It was not on my bingo card. But with you, anything is possible. Let me just say that, my friend. Now, with the let's talk about what it is. With the continued, this is kind of the framing of it. With continued growing economic pressure, threats of tariffs impacting the cost of living, Chorus Entertainments, with Chorus, is excited to add a brand new topical program to its talk radio lineup, debuting April 12th. I'll give you the stations, called Bite Sized. So the difference, and you and I talked about this for a few months, and one iteration was, let's just take this podcast and cut it down for the radio show. But where we came to is, like, this is a trade podcast, right? We say terms that really the trade would understand, but the average consumer, wouldn't care or wouldn't know. So the show, and I'd love to hear your perspective. We've already recorded our first episode, is more like explaining like tariffs to consumers. Like, what does it mean? What do they do?
Pretty
Who does it
much.
pay for? So we're really trying to take how do we explain the food business and a bit of the food politics, the two are kind of more these days meshed together, and explain it to Canadians in a way that they can understand how food appears on their plate, or why food costs what it does, or all those things.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like, going back to the tariff example, instead of talking about how tariffs can actually impact geopolitics, supply chains, we're going to be talking about how tariffs actually impacts will impact consumers, and how to deal with that. And so, absolutely. So I'm really excited to do this show. So I believe that there are 6 stations around the country that are part of the Chorus network. So I think some stations will actually air our show on Saturdays and some on Sundays. Look at your programming, look at your schedules for your favorite Chorus station. But I'm really excited to do this with you. I don't think I could have I would have wanted to do this with anyone else. So there you go.
And thanks to Mike Bendixson from Chorus. He's been our partner on this, and he's given us a bunch of ideas and some great feedback. It's a little hard for you and I sometimes to switch back and forth between the consumer lens and the trade lens. We're kind of stuck a little bit sometimes in the trade lens. So as you said, we debut this weekend, 6:40, which is Toronto, Saturday at 2. And then the rest of the stations, it's Sunday, CFPL at 9 a.m. ET, CJOB, that's Winnipeg, I believe.
That's Winnipeg, that's right.
Yeah, Sunday, 2 p.m., 770 QR Calgary, 3 p.m. Mountain. This is on Sundays. CHED, Sundays, 3 p.m. Mountain again. And CKNW, Sundays at 1 p.m. PST on the West Coast. So there we are, coast to coast with our fun. Now, it's a six-show pilot. We'll see how people like it, how we like doing it, because it's just more, is going to be
more
fun.
Work.
It's more work, but let's see if the people like it. And if the people like it, we'll continue. But anyway, tune in. We got some great guests talking about...
we'll talk about wild versus farm fish.
Yep,
we'll talk about supply management. We'll talk about proteins. We'll talk about food banks. We'll talk about all sorts of things.
Lobsters and wheat and all, trying to go coast to coast, right, for a nice range of Canadian listeners. Anyway, well, that's it for this show. Let's leave it there. I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer growth consultant. More and more media entrepreneur, as it turns out. And you are?
And I'm the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Safe travels, everybody.
Take care.